To my great surprise, the second episode of this series managed to avoid a lot of the problems that were present in the first episode, and that's because the show creators found all new ways to screw up the characters and the story. Were you hoping to see Boba Fett, the fearsome bounty hunter? Well, too bad, because you're not gonna get any of that. Instead, what you're going to get is an entire episode based upon thinly veiled woke weirdo anti-capitalist nonsense mixed in with a good amount of pretentious victimhood complex. Not exactly the sort of thing that a normal person would be interested in, but since when has Disney ever cared about providing content that people would actually want to watch? The Book of Boba Fett is bad. Episode 2. We start out back at Boba Fett's base. He's just woken up from his little nappy time that he had to take in the bacta tank after getting his ass handed to him in the last episode, because Disney has taken one of the most feared bounty hunters in the galaxy and turned him into a joke.
Spoiler alert, you're a soy boy!
Fennec managed to capture one of the S.H.I.E.L.D. guys, and now they're trying to interrogate him. Right away, things get real dumb real fast, but something I need to mention is that all the acting and the dialogue in this opening scene is truly awful. Even for Disney standards, this scene is just bad, and it also makes Boba Fett look like a complete fucking idiot. Since the S.H.I.E.L.D. guy doesn't want to speak, Boba Fett asks his droid what he knows about the man, and the droid says that he's from the Order of the Nightwind, to which Boba Fett immediately responds that the man is an assassin for hire, and the droid confirms this, saying that it's also a very expensive group. We learn later in the episode that the Order of the Nightwind work primarily for the Hutts. In fact, they're only permitted to work in Hutt territory, and Fennec also makes a remark indicating that all of the members for the Order of the Nightwind wear the same uniform. So I have to ask, why is Boba Fett a complete moron? Why wouldn't he instantly recognize the uniform for the Order of the Nightwind? Why would the droid have to tell him the organization's name, even though apparently Boba Fett knows what they do? And why would Fennec have to tell him what kind of uniform they would wear? I point this out because Boba Fett worked for the Hutts for many, many years, and while he wouldn't have partnered up with the Order of the Nightwind, he would have worked alongside them as a competitor, and a lot of the jobs that they had to take would have also been issued to Boba Fett as well. Remember, Boba Fett, even though he's a bounty hunter, he doesn't always have to capture them and bring them back. Some of the time, he's told to just go and kill the target and bring back proof. This is one of the reasons why Darth Vader even explicitly mentioned that he didn't want the targets disintegrated, because Boba Fett would just find the target and take them out. And that is exactly what the Order of the Nightwind also does. So you're telling me that Boba Fett worked for the Hutts for years and years alongside this other group, and for whatever reason, he just didn't recognize the uniform that he was wearing?
What good are you? Do you have a brain?
But don't worry, it gets worse. We're told that the assassins from the Order of the Nightwind are legendary in both skill and reputation. And yet in the previous episode, their master plan to go after Boba Fett was to just surround him with shields and then gently poke him with static electricity tickle rods.
I know a killer when I see one.
Within the Star Wars universe, I can think of a million possible ways for an assassin to carry out his work that would not only be more interesting to the audience, but also far more effective than using static electricity tickle rods that are more of an inconvenience than an actual threat. Even when Boba Fett was getting his ass handed to him by these clowns, his injuries didn't come from the energy from the weapons, it came from just getting hit by them, and you could have done the same thing with a stick. So the very idea of the Order of the Evening Flatulence being comprised of legendary assassins is laughably absurd.
It never happened. No way. It never happened.
Since they need this guy to talk, Fennec gets the brilliant idea to drop him into the Rancor pit, and this apparently terrifies the guy so much that he immediately gives up all the information. This guy was willing to basically throw his neck onto a blade, and yet we're supposed to believe that somehow he's afraid of the Rancor. Why? What would it matter if he has his head cut off by the Gamorrean or if it gets bitten off by the Rancor? He would die instantly in either case. The sudden induced fear is just nonsensical.
It's absurd.
But if you stop and think about it, it gets even dumber, because Jabba the Hutt has been dead for quite a few years. The Order of the Evening Flatulence works only in the Hutt-controlled territory. There is absolutely no way that this guy and the Order of the Evening Flatulence would be unaware of the details surrounding Jabba the Hutt's death. There is absolutely no way that he wouldn't know that the Rancor in the pit had been killed by a Jedi. That would have been talked about by everyone in Tatooine. Everyone! But what's even worse is the agonizingly predictable payoff for this scene. Yes, there's also nostalgia bait included with it, but the payoff is that we know the Rancor is gone, so when the door opens up, what happens? It's just a little mouse. So the guy was freaking out, and he gave up all the information, and there wasn't even a Rancor, it's just a mouse. We knew this was gonna happen, it's so predictable, it's incredibly stupid. The Disney writers can't think of anything interesting that hasn't been done a million times before. The guy says he was hired by the mayor, so Boba Fett heads over to the mayor's office, and once he arrives, we get an extremely cringeworthy scene of a Weasley secretary who's unable to find Boba Fett's name on an appointment schedule, so he can't get let into the office. Cue the laugh track.
I'm glad to see you got a sense of humor.
Just like with the mouse thing, this is incredibly predictable because we've seen this kind of nonsense, unoriginal setup in any number of other shows and movies where someone goes into the office and they can't get in because some Weasley secretary says that they don't have an appointment. It's not funny, it's dumb, it's cringy, it's unoriginal. Get some fucking writers with talent, please.
You hear that, Rosen? We're having fun. Oh.
Hey, I'm not having fun.
But don't worry, it gets worse. It gets so much worse. Boba Fett eventually makes his way into the mayor's office, where the mayor has the shield guy killed almost immediately, and then we get one of the most awful lines of dialogue I have ever heard in all of the Disney Star Wars. The mayor offers a reward to Boba Fett for bringing in the shield guy, to which Boba Fett responds,
I am not a bounty hunter.
Oh my God!
This is terrible.
I am not a bounty hunter. There have been a lot of stupid things said and done in Disney Star Wars, but this definitely is near the top of the list. So the mayor claims that he was not responsible for sending the shield guy, and tells Boba Fett to go and investigate at the cantina instead. One of the major criticisms of the Mandalorian series was that the storyline felt very much like it belonged in a video game. The main character is told to go to a place to talk to a person or to get a thing, only to then go and talk to a different person at another place or to go and get another thing. And it's just this long chain of events. That sort of thing works fine in a video game, but it's very lazy and low effort when it comes to movies and TV shows. The Book of Boba Fett seems to be essentially doing the same thing. At first, Boba Fett was told to go and see the mayor by the shield guy, and once he arrived, he was told to go and see the manager of the cantina by the mayor. And once he arrives at the cantina, the manager tells Boba Fett to go and talk to the twins, who are cousins of Jabba the Hutt.
That's just lazy writing.
All of this feels like it was ripped out of a boring quest chain from World of Warcraft. Regardless, Boba Fett goes outside and he talks to the twins. These are a brother and sister, and since Jabba the Hutt is dead, they're now here to take control of his old territory. And I know that this show and The Mandalorian sometimes gets a little confusing on where they might fall in the timeline compared to the movies, but to be clear, this show takes place about 5 years after the events of Return of the Jedi, which would mean that Jabba the Hutt has been gone for quite a few years. It seems fairly ridiculous that his cousins would wait until just now to claim his territory instead of years ago. The twins are being carried through the street on a litter by a bunch of servants, but for some bizarre reason, they decided to have only one Wookiee as a guard, and I don't care how good he is, that is incredibly stupid. They're Hutts, and they're moving through the street in the middle of the day, they have tons of enemies, and they decided to have only one guard. And I should remind you that their cousin, Jabba the Hutt, was killed in this area in the middle of the day, surrounded by his security. So, why would they have only one guard? That's really dumb.
Not a great plan.
It's even more dumb when you consider that the twins know who Boba Fett and Fennec are and what they're capable of. There's a short argument, the twins make some threats, but then they leave, and then Boba Fett goes back to his base where he can have a juice box and some more nappy time.
How dare you?
And here's where it gets truly awful, because for the rest of the episode, it's a flashback of Boba Fett's time with the Tusken Raiders, and as I mentioned earlier in this video, this episode is nothing more than thinly veiled woke garbage. The entire storyline with the Tusken Raiders is that they're an oppressed people, and they're nothing more than itty-bitty widow victims, and we should feel bad for them because the evil capitalists stole their land.
You serious?
No, I'm not kidding. That is the actual plot for the rest of the episode. It is unbelievably fucking stupid for a variety of reasons, and I'll get more into that later. So we start with Boba Fett practicing his hand-to-hand combat with one of the Tusken Raiders when suddenly a train starts moving through the area. When the guards on the train see the Tusken Raiders, they immediately open fire with blasters, which results in a bunch of the Tuskens getting killed. Later that night, there's a funeral where the Tuskens put the bodies on a pyre. This show is trying really, really hard to try to get us to sympathize with the Tusken Raiders, which is a bunch of bullshit. The only reason why the guards on the train would fire on the Tusken Raiders is because the Tusken Raiders attack and steal from others constantly.
The next one of you primates even touches me.
I can say with absolute certainty that the Tusken Raiders have attacked this train before in the past, which is why the guards on the train were automatically defensive when they were going past that area.
Excellent point.
How would I know this? Because it's what the Tuskens have always been shown to do. The Tusken Raiders are not good people. They're called Raiders because one of the primary aspects of their entire civilization involves stealing from others. And it's not just supplies and property. The Tusken Raiders steal people to use them as slaves. Do you remember this little incident from the prequel movies? While it's certainly true that there are going to be good and bad people throughout the galaxy, there's absolutely no question that some of those alien civilizations are just inherently bad. This is because their entire civilization, their culture, their way of living is wrong, and in many cases, it's just plain evil. Examples of this would be the Hutts, the Genoshans, the Yuuzhan Vong, and of course, the Tusken Raiders. Remember, not only do the Tusken Raiders capture people to use them as slaves, they also killed pod racer pilots just for fun. Sympathizing with the Tuskens is just as dumb as trying to sympathize with the Hutts. Let me say this as clear as I possibly can. The Tusken Raiders are objectively bad people.
This is canon. This is set in stone. These are facts.
But of course, the entire point of this episode is to portray the Tusken Raiders as some sort of oppressed victims because the show creators want to score woke points by lazily tying them to real-world equivalents. Now, in order to try to drive up more sympathy for this particular group, later in the episode, the Tusken leader will tell Boba Fett that there are many different tribes of Tuskens and that all the other Tusken groups survive through killing, but this is the one group of Tuskens that apparently doesn't kill anyone unprovoked, and it's the good one, as we're supposed to believe. However, I would have to point out that in the first episode, this particular group of Tuskens captured Boba Fett and the other alien to use them as slave labor.
Are we the baddies?
Which again, I would like to remind you, sounds oddly familiar to what happened to Anakin's mother. So the idea that this group of Tuskens is somehow better because they take slaves instead of killing people is fucking absurd.
I hate this. It is revolting.
Oh, and by the way, Anakin did nothing wrong.
This is where the fun begins.
There is one more thing about this scene that I want to draw your attention to, and that is the parallel between what happened with Anakin and what is happening with Boba Fett. When they're carrying the dead body, they both do it in the exact same way, and there's a cloth that has been wrapped around the body in order to try to preserve some of the dignity. Now, I don't know if the show writers created this parallel on purpose, but if they did, it is unbelievably stupid and self-defeating for their purpose of generating sympathy for the Tusken Raiders.
All right, explain this to me like I'm a 2-year-old, okay?
The reason for this is that they're trying to generate sympathy for the Tusken Raiders by recreating a scene that generated a lot of sympathy for Anakin Skywalker. But there's a really big problem with this. The entire reason why Anakin had to carry his mother home like that was because she was killed by the Tusken Raiders.
Ironic.
And even though this particular group of Tuskens isn't the one responsible for Anakin's mother, this group is just as bad as the other one. The other group kidnapped Shmi Skywalker, forced her into slave labor, and essentially worked her to death. This group kidnapped Boba Fett and the Rodian and brought them into the desert in order to work them as slave labor, and the Rodian ended up dying. The only reason why Boba Fett is still alive is because he managed to kill the lizard thing and save the kid. That is the only reason, but this group of Tuskens is just as bad as the one that was responsible for Shmi Skywalker.
Animals can sense evil.
Because the Rodian is dead. Shmi Skywalker is dead. Boba Fett would probably have been dead if he didn't kill the lizard thing. So no, this group is not good. I do not have any sympathy for this group of Tuskens, nor should you. And even though they're trying to create these parallels, it completely falls flat because what happened to Shmi Skywalker was terrible, and what happened to this Tusken Raider that Boba Fett is carrying was a good thing.
And nothing of value was lost.
Because it means that there's one less Tusken that's going to raid a village and kidnap people to force them into slave labor. Anyways, continuing this garbage story, Boba Fett has a plan to take down the trains, and in order to do so, he heads over to a nearby small cantina and steals a bunch of hover bikes. So it would seem that Boba Fett is already embracing the beloved Tusken culture of stealing stuff from other people.
Stop it. Get some help.
He brings them back to the Tusken camp and begins training them on how to use the bikes. The plan is to use them to catch up to the train and jump on board to take control. A few weeks later, the train passes by once more, and Boba Fett leads the attack. He and the Tuskens manage to stop the train by destroying the engine. The aliens who are on the train are rounded up and held prisoner while the Tuskens start removing all the goods from it. The leader of the aliens says that he believes the Tuskens are uncivilized raiders and that he was only trying to protect his own train and the route. And all of that is irrefutably correct.
A very thorough investigation that has found no evidence of foul play.
Boba Fett says that the sands are no longer free for the evil corporations to use, and that they must pay a toll to the Tusken Raiders if they want to pass through it. But the reason that he gives for all this is fucking idiotic. Boba Fett claims that the Tuskens lay ancestral claim to the Dune Sea, as if that's supposed to mean anything.
Whoa, this is worthless.
And if this sounds familiar, it's because it's the same idiotic rationale used by woke weirdos in the real world that leads them to believe that land can be stolen, which is objectively false.
Let me explain. No, there is too much. Let me sum up.
Simply put, land cannot be stolen. It is not possible. Land can be acquired in 3 ways. It can be purchased, it can be gifted, or it can be conquered. All 3 of these methods are entirely legitimate means of acquiring land. Stealing only occurs when something is taken unlawfully. However, when land is taken through conquest, there is a change to the lawful authority, meaning that it's not stolen, it is under the lawful control of the new authority. And conquerors are never subject to the law of the conquered. It's only the other way around.
Now we have a firm grasp of the obvious.
What's even more ridiculous about the fallacy of stolen land is that the groups that are trying to reclaim it today because they controlled it 500 years ago, they only got it 500 years ago because they conquered someone else.
That's not an opinion, it's a fact.
And this is true for 100% of every single group that is trying to retake whatever land they claim that their group controlled 500 years ago. They, by their own rules, stole it back then. They're just not honest enough to admit that's what they did to get it in the first place.
Do you get me?
So with all of that having been said, if Boba Fett and the Tusken Raiders wanted to claim this area through right of conquest, then that would be perfectly acceptable. However, this pretentious victimhood complex that implies that the Tuskens have a right to this land is fucking absurd. And since the show creators want to mirror real-life groups, I can say with absolute certainty that this group of Tusken Raiders were not the first ones here. Originally, it was held by a different group, and this group of Tusken Raiders took it by conquering and killing the previous Tuskens that were living here. So the logic being used by the show creators is that the aliens on the train are bad because they stole it from the Tusken Raiders, but the Tusken Raiders are good because they stole it first?
That don't make no sense.
But don't worry, it gets worse. Now Boba Fett is even more accepted with the Tuskens, and they're going to send him on some sort of spiritual journey by shoving a lizard up his nose.
I have questions.
I'm not kidding. This is a real thing that happens in the show, and not only is it incredibly stupid, it also looks fake as all hell. Regardless, now with the lizard up his nose, Boba Fett wanders into the desert and begins hallucinating. He imagines that he sees a tree, which then turns into a sarlacc pit, and then in the next scene, we see him dragging a tree branch. So does this mean that the tree was real, or what? Because there are no trees in this desert. They're just not there. So where would he have found the tree branch? On the imaginary tree? None of this makes any goddamn sense. But regardless, when he gets back to the camp, the lizard just jumps out of his nose and goes back into a little cage thing.
I hate all of that.
Boba Fett then uses his imaginary tree branch to create a very real, not imaginary gaffy stick, and this entire sequence of events is dumb beyond comprehension. But it's gonna get even worse, because later that night, Boba Fett then proceeds to do a haka dance around a campfire. This is because the actor playing Boba Fett has part of his heritage being Maori, and since the entire episode was nothing more than a woke weirdo wet dream about indigenous reclamation, it's not surprising that the writers decided to include this, even though it makes absolutely no fucking sense within the context of Star Wars. But it gets even dumber when you realize that a big part of this actor's heritage is something other than Maori. He's also Scottish and Irish.
All hope had been lost. Or had it.
But you're not gonna ever see this character bust out a set of bagpipes and a kilt and start dancing around the bonfire because it's not going to be woke enough. They need those diversity points, so they're going to go with the Maori haka dance, even though it doesn't make a lick of fucking sense in the Star Wars universe. So in truth, this is nothing more than pretentious, empty-headed virtue signaling by the show's creators. But thankfully, that's the end of episode 2.